Hey, what's going on, everybody? It is Undead, back again for the 4th episode of my How to Dominate series, where I give you tips, tricks, and general strategies to help you succeed and master all the heroes and villains in Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, last week I went ahead and mentioned that this episode's hero was going to be decided by viewers, and it seemed that the majority of you wanted to see a guide on Luke Skywalker. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When I initially tried to get any sort of noteworthy footage at all when playing as Luke, I was pretty much ready to pull out my hair because just how god-awful he seemed. Now, to be honest, my general impressions haven't really changed too drastically, but I do definitely feel like I have a much better representation of how to play Luke successfully. And let's jump into it. Now, boy, oh boy, did I have the complete wrong idea when playing Luke for the very first time when I was trying to learn how to play him. Having just come from my favorite hero in the entire game, Darth Vader, it was a real challenge to get used to Luke's fragile nature. And now, while Luke's starting health of 750 and his ability to regen 250 of that back at any time doesn't necessarily look particularly fragile, his close quarters melee playstyle makes that health pool deplete in a blink of an eye. Now, the confusing part about Luke is that he, as a melee hero, he has to get in close to deal and eliminate players, but his abilities don't tailor to that at all. In fact, none of Luke's abilities are lethal at all. Contrary to Darth Vader, who has a force choke and a saber throw, Luke's abilities merely push enemies around and disorient them. For that reason, when playing Luke, you need to think of him as a siege breaker similar to Kylo Ren, and makes Luke's incredible agility your greatest strength. Your job as Luke is to rush in via a flanking route and use your force push and repulse to dismantle enemy defenses, throw the enemy off balance, and then dart out with your Saber Rush, killing an enemy or two on the way out. Doing this successfully will give your team the breather it needs to take or hold onto objectives, and is crucial on maps like Death Star, Kamino, Naboo, or other maps that can sometimes end in choke point stalemates. Now, the most important thing to remember when playing as Luke is you are not meant to be a killing machine like Vader. Your job is to break the enemy's back and allow your team to finish off the enemies you push around like ragdolls. As far as star cards go for Luke, I haven't really noticed any standout cards that really blow me away quite like the ones that did for Vader. However, the one card I can safely recommend very easily is the card Cleansing the Darkness. Now, with this card, Luke can regen 20 health per trooper killed and up to 100 health for each hero kill that you can get. And similar to any hero that has this similar card, this is Luke's lifeline and only chance to regain any health back once you get past that 250 threshold. And considering that you'll be deep diving a lot as Luke into enemies, this is definitely a must-have card. Now, the next two cards are a bit of personal preference and choice depending on which cards and playstyle you like the most, but for me personally, in order to keep my sanity while playing as Luke trying to grab all this footage for this video, I went with Strong Repulse and Epicenter. And then those two cards essentially just increase Luke's Repulse ability radius and damage. Now, why these cards, you might ask? Because it's absolutely hilarious, dude. Seeing troopers and heroes just getting flown everywhere is absolutely priceless. Like I mentioned before, Luke's playstyle is very unique and took me a bit of getting used to if I could really get the hang of it. The difficult part about playing Luke is just how different he is to Kylo in terms of his force powers. Now, as you know, Kylo revolves around using his powers to grab enemies and pull them closer to him so he can slash them up close with his lightsaber. Luke, on the other hand, focuses on pushing his enemies away from him and therefore away from his lightsaber. It's a very weird thing and a hard thing to get used to, but with that in mind, to be a successful Luke player, especially in Galactic Assault, you need to go in with the mindset that Luke is not a kill monster. He isn't Boba Fett or Vader or Palpatine. He's a team player and excels when synergizing your abilities with your team. Rush into the enemy team by opening up with a force push to get the immediate threats out of the way, jump around a bit and generally just be unpredictable, and then try and hit as many people as you possibly can with your repulse ability once you hit the ground. While everyone is still picking themselves up, pick a way out and saber rush out of there, preferably trying to get a few quick kills on the way out. From there, just chill out, let your cooldowns come back, especially your saber rush, and rinse and repeat. One thing that you shouldn't have to worry too much about when playing as Luke is enemy heroes, because if there's one thing that Luke did surprise me about when I played as him, it's his ability to take out enemy heroes very quickly. Use your force powers to knock them around like ragdolls, mash left click or right trigger, block when necessary, and the enemy hero will be gone in no time. First up is Luke's first ability, his Force Push, which has received a startling nerf since its appearance in Battlefront 2015. This time around, Force Push no longer kills enemies outright, but instead deals a small smidge of damage and throws enemies to the moon. While it's not too effective against enemies damage-wise, it's part of Luke's theme of throwing the enemy off balance and knocking them off their feet. You do want to use Force Push against a large group of enemies that you find yourself facing off against or catch off guard in one of your flanks. You do want to use Force Push to push enemies towards your team if possible in the situation. Doing so allows your allies to score easy points and will help you claim objectives very easily. And lastly, you do want to force push enemies and enemy heroes, especially into hazards on the map, such as the platforms on Camino and in the pits and the ice caves of Hoth. I'd argue this is probably the most valuable application of this ability and the one you should have the most fun with. You don't want to use Force Push against vehicles as it won't have any effect and will waste your ability. And finally, you don't want to use Force Push if there are enemies outside your range, because those enemies will laser you down while you wait for the Force Push animation to cast. Next up is Luke's Repulse Ability, which honestly is just a circular version of the Force Push. If I'm not mistaken, it does relatively the same amount of damage as the Force Push, but in a radius around Luke instead of just in front of him. Now, because of the similarities, the do's and don'ts of Luke's Force Push ability can be applied to Luke's Repulse Ability, and the only big difference is that the Repulse leaves you even more exposed to enemy fire. For Luke to be able to use this ability, he has to stand completely still and not be able to move for over a second, which is much more than enough time to take massive damage. For that reason, you do want to use Repulse when you catch the enemy off guard almost exclusively. One thing I love to do is to use Luke's high jump ability to plop right down the middle of a group of enemies unexpectedly and then use my Repulse ability. You don't want to use Repulse in a frontal assault fashion. Take, for example, you're trying to clear the narrow hallways of the Death Star. If you run straight up the middle up to the enemies and use your ability, they're going to be fully aware of you, and any enemies that don't get affected by your Repulse will most likely just laser you down into nothing. Luke's third and final ability is his Saber Rush ability, which, like his Force Push ability and its counterpart to 2015, has received a drastic change. Luke's Saber Rush is much slower than before and deals only a fraction of the damage. Unfortunately, I'd say Luke's Saber Rush isn't as good as Darth Maul's. It has a long animation, and the distance traveled by it is pretty minimal, but either way, it's the best you got, so it's important you utilize it to its fullest potential. You do want to use Saber Rush to quickly get out of combat and to avoid as much damage as possible. You do want to use Saber Rush in combination with Force Push, as it will allow you to close the gap that you make when you Force Push the enemy away to get an easy kill. And lastly, you do want to use the Saber Rush in conjunction with Luke's Repulse ability. This is a very crucial step to your success. After you drop in the middle of a bunch of enemies and you activate your Repulse ability and send them all flying, I would generally not recommend you stick around to clean up the mess, but rather dash out with Saber Rush and snap a few kills on the way out. Let your team come in and clean up the mess as the enemies recover. Now, Luke's Saber Rush ability is only on a relatively short cooldown, so you can use it pretty often without too much worry, but regardless, you always want to make sure you have a Saber Rush, at least one Saber Rush ready before jumping into the fray, because without it, you are going to be up creek without a paddle. In conclusion, Luke is a very complicated hero. His abilities that all seem to rely on him pushing enemies away may seem like a hindrance at first, but with a little patience, practice, and the understanding that his abilities are tools to dismantle the enemy team, become a huge amount of fun to toss around people with. Your focus on Luke is hit and run tactics and speed. Never stop moving and always be a thorn in the enemy's side. Don't be afraid of anything. You're Luke Skywalker after all. That about wraps up episode 4 of my How to Dominate series in Battlefront 2. I really hope some of you guys found these tips and strategies useful, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and feedback down in the comments below, and if this video helped you out, I'd be forever grateful if you shared this video with one of your friends. The next video will be a toss-up between Rey and Yoda, so be sure to let me know which one you guys want to see down below, and the most requested choice is the one I'll do. And as always guys, I'll see you in the next one. Catch you later.